Hello, and welcome to another season of the Storied Arcs podcast. I am your co-host, Mike.
And I'm your co-host, Alex.
And this week, we are diving in to Outpost Zero, Volume 1. Now, if you're reading the collected edition, like I mentioned in the Zero that I have, you will not know that Volume 1 is actually called The Smallest Town in the Universe. For some reason, they got them numbered as 3 chapters, but they didn't include chapter names. I actually really like the names of the trades. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that at all, Alex, but
I like when they, when you go out of your way that it's just like Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3. I like having a name there. I think it's right. It shows some effort in the story there. But in the collected edition, it is just Volume 1, though, right? It's Chapter 1.
Yeah,
right?
It's just Chapter 1, yeah.
And they're just 3 chapters, correct?
And when it was coming out in single issue, it wasn't The Smallest Town in the Universe Part 1, for the first issue.
No.
Which, those in those cases, you have to name the trades. Here, it's just kind of a bonus, and I like it. That being said, a lot of books don't do it. I think Paper Girls is just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
It is, yeah.
Kill or Be Killed was 1, 2, 3, 4.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just going through ones that we've covered on the podcast.
But there are, a couple. We just covered Die. Die not only does that,
definitely had them, yeah.
But they also name all of their issues. Outpost Zero has a similar thing. There are actual issue names, which are
which again you lose in the collected editions.
You do. So are those critical? I don't know if they're critical or not. I think they're interesting. When you're reading a single issue, it's one of those things you get because you that's the first thing you see when you open the issue. You get a bit of a tease. For example, issue 1 of Outpost Zero, it's called Plunge/Yield. What does that mean?
Since you're talking about the intro, why don't you point out what you just pointed out to me on the splash page?
Sure. Well, so the first thing in each single issue, is a credits page for this book. So you get the full credits page of the creators of Skybound, of Image, and then as you go on, there's a small summary blurb as well. So not only is it credits, but it's recaps. And at the bottom of the page, there are you see 5 figures. They're not silhouettes. You see them in how they're dressed, so they're identifiable. They don't have faces, weirdly though, but they're 5 figures, which as you read along, retroactively that from left to right, they are Liz, Mitchell, Aaliyah, Steven, and Sam, which are our 5 main characters, our 5 main kids that we follow. Again, this is the first thing you see when you open the first issue. Of course, then as you go along, by the end of the first issue, we see what happens to Steven. We see Steven's, going out into the frost and dying. Then what happens is, starting in issue 2, that recap page, it's the same figures, except Steven is missing now. And what happens is you get a visual representation, things that make sense the further you go on, in that, again, the way the order is set up, again, going from left to right, Liz, Mitchell, and Aaliyah are 3 together, and now there's a gap to where Steven was, and a gap between the rest of the group and Sam, which reflects what happens in the story, because Sam is kind of the outsider. And as we see in the first issue, his only connection to the rest of the group is his friendship with Steven. It's kind of like we're friends with Steven and this guy's friends with Steven, but we're not friends together. It's that kind of situation there, where Steven is the link between the group of friends he grew up with and this other guy. Well, now that he's gone, their only connection between the 2 groups is missing. So there's a representation, there's a gap there shown. And as the book goes along, as we go into the, further volumes of the line, further issues, we'll get there when we get there in the coming weeks. But we see how as the kids start kind of working a plan and coming together and get to know each other better, we see that orientation on the credits page change, which I think is an interesting.
I think it's really interesting.
It's a really cool thing to show, to start the issue that way. You can kind of see where, quite literally, you see where our characters stand. You see who they're with, who they're working with, and all that. And it's one of those cool things that I noticed going back through again, being like, all right, I forgot they had done this. Because as you're reading it, you don't really see that. You're not paying attention to the story that way. You're just getting into the actual story. But to see the recap page and know what's coming now on a reread, and to see something like that, and to see the care that's put into that, again, it's the credits page, and it's got a 2-sentence recap of of what's happened so far, the previous issue. It's easy to skip over that if you've been reading all this. I know what's going on in the story. You skip past that page and you get right into the story. But to have the care to put that visual representation into the book, I think is really cool and really notable, and not something you see very often. To care enough about that kind of recap page to do something story. Maybe not story.
What strikes out to me, or what jumps out at me, or strikes me, is that there's almost no way that's in the script. That's all the artists taking the initiative of saying, like, hey, just because it's a credits page doesn't mean it has to be nothing.
Or it's I don't know if it's in the script, but I want it's probably something they talked about. Like, hey, here's something we can do, and then something that we can then have fun with down the line in terms of shifting characters around and changing things. Like I feel like that's the kind of thing they would have just like a discussion with them, maybe between McKeever and Tefengi, with the editor. I feel like that's the kind of thing you would do. Something you talk about, and then once you strike on that idea, once you glom onto that, you're like, oh yeah, that's cool. We can keep doing that and ride it through. So, but yeah, it's not something you. I mean, the recap page, the full page devoted to a recap and credits and all that is rarer and rarer. But then to use that page for more than just a recap summary of the previous issues, but to also do something else visually with it, I think that's really fun and interesting. And again, it is something that you lose in the collections and in both the trade and the complete collection, because if you're reading the whole thing, like, you don't need to stop every 22 pages and be like, here's the author again, here's the full credits and all that.
It's just one of those trade-offs for single issue readers. And I think the greatest example that I can think of was the pure delight I had reading Royal City the first time by Jeff Lemire, because in the back of each issue is a letter, which usually those letters get, picked up and shoved in the back of a trade. So it's like, yeah, okay, a trade reader would get that, but they would have to like ping pong back and forth between like, I finished this chapter, let me go read the letter.
Because you don't get them in order.
Right, you're not reading them in the right order. Yeah. But Royal City also had a playlist that he wrote for each issue that did not make it into the collected trades. Now, I know there's a complete collection out. Maybe it's in there, and I know you can like look them up on Spotify, but it still just felt like this little private thing between you and the author. That was just magic, and I think that's nice. That it's nice when they do that. So rather than framing it as something that the collected reader is missing out on, it's something extra for the single issue reader, because they're the ones who really keep the book going.
That's fair.
Right? It's that relationship with the. So it's like you're not missing any story or anything essential, but you get to feel like some insider baseball with a product in a creative world that you love.
100. Yeah, it's not story significant. It is just a bonus of like there's care and effort into every page of this comic. It isn't just the script and the panels, but the design of the credits page has been taken into account, to the fact that what's happening in each issue is being reflected on that page. So yeah, it's an extra level of care and attention that most comics don't have, which isn't a knock on them. It's because credits pages like this just don't exist. The ones that do exist like this, where it's a full page of all credits, a lot of times they come at the end, after the story's done and you've wrapped up, you read the credits page, and then there's like previews for like other books that are coming out. It's that sort of thing. So to have this to be the very first thing after you open the issue from the cover, I think it's pretty cool to see.
Yeah. You know what else is cool to see? Yeah. And I'm just going to get straight into it here.
Sure.
What I loved about this, and what I think the title of this suggests, The Smallest Town in the Universe, I think this is a pure sci-fi play. And I think that's almost lost nowadays, because movies that do sci-fi almost always make it sci-fi adventure or sci-fi action. And a lot of comics, like Paper Girls, is sci-fi, but man, it's like full throttle action. Like it's nonstop. There's always a chase or a fight or a punch or something being thrown. Whereas this is like a small town drama. It's just that the setting happens to be that what's the Aristotelian impossible probability type scenario where it's like, yeah, they're in a space colony and they're struggling to survive, but it's beyond, that's the setting, and then the characters are just kind of living out a real human story with a problem that we just wouldn't encounter. But we can translate most of the emotions from our world to theirs and vice versa.
Yes.
And so, like, there's not a lot of action depicted here. Like, they're throwing a dodgeball around for a couple pages. And then, like, this big storm hits and you see them bracing for it. But it's mostly people sitting around talking. And I love it.
Oh, no, it's character drama. Obviously, especially in this first arc, where we're dealing with the death of Steven, the character. We only meet for one issue, and so it's an incredibly emotional story arc, because you've got kids. These they're 14, I think. You've got kids dealing with the loss of a friend, of a colleague, and not just that, but in the way they lost him. And then on top of that, you also have, you mentioned this ice storm, and one thing I love about this arc here is that we have parallel tracks here. The adults are worried about, like, we got to survive, we got to break this ice, otherwise the dome collapses, and if that happens, we all die. We have this very practical, we live on this harsh environment, and that's always trying to kill us. We have to figure out how to fix that so we can keep living. And then this other storyline of these kids, of, like, again, trying to deal and process with the death of a friend, specifically death by suicide here. And it isn't like they're immune to death. When you have a colony like this, I'm sure they all have known people who have died. I think we do learn that. I think Mitchell, his mother died by suicide as well. So these are things that they live with, but still having to process one of your friends at that age. So you have their journey as kids working it that way. And you also have something very relevant for the adults who run this colony. You have these parallel tracks here, but you're right. In terms of action, is that there's kind of kids' emotions and, like, the bureaucracy of, like, how do we deal with this problem of our town? Like, those are our two paths.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking of the West Wing line where they were talking about, I forget what it was. It was something about paid maternity leave or something like that. And Josh Lyman says something like, how do they do it in Scandinavia? And Amy Gardner says, but everyone in Scandinavia kills themselves. And he was like, well, that's pretty hard to argue with. And I was like, well, this is like a little Scandinavia. This is like the, freezing tundra, and the number one cause of death is suicide.
Yeah.
And the depiction, I mean, it's important that we capture that, not just because suicide's a recurring theme, but it kind of shows, like, they are living a very short scale version of, like, planet Earth, where they're like, eventually this dome won't exist and then we're all dead. Like, there's no terraforming this planet, and
there's no leaving either. There's
no leaving. There's no terraforming.
Yeah.
We're just in here until it decides we're not. And to have some agency or some control, because life is so bleak, and you're like, the best I can hope for is to stay in this dome for 60, 70 years. And then, like, all they did was take the existential crisis of Earth and society and just shrink it down into a snow globe, which is like the cover art for the first trade. It's their whole dome in a snow globe that Aaliyah is holding.
Which is, that's exactly what they're dealing with. And it's something that,
and I think people who struggle with depression, this is a great metaphor for what it feels like. It's like, everything is so finite, everything's so confined.
Yeah.
Like, I can't really see any purpose, in living out my days. Yeah. And I think that's exactly how the people in here are feeling. That being said, the first suicide we witness is Steven. Mm-hmm. And we're led to believe, because our main character, which I'm calling Aaliyah the main character. I don't know if they passed the baton a little bit, but she's the main character.
Definitely
for the first time.
I think so. Yeah.
She doesn't buy that.
Yeah.
She doesn't think, oh, he just couldn't deal with life anymore, like so many other people here. Mm-hmm. What's not questioned, though, is like, okay, well, if there was some other reason that he took his own life, that wasn't that? Could it be that it's not this dread catching up with everyone here, and that there's some other force at work causing these deaths? So they've not questioned that, but I wonder if they'll pull on that thread in the coming chapters.
But I think that,
or if that was just like, this is an established thing. Whoever wanted to make it look like, he died under non-suspicious circumstances, you just make it look like a suicide.
Well, but I think what it comes down to, though, is that they've been here long enough, and like, this isn't the first time someone has done something like this, like this isn't. I don't think it's an unfair assumption to think that, because you hear all the things that I think you hear in cases like that, where like, well, he didn't say anything, he didn't seem depressed, he seemed fine, I talked to him yesterday, and I think those are ways that people try to rationalize why someone would take their own life, because
how people process. I've been to enough of those funerals.
Because they're thinking about it from a rational standpoint, as it has to be rational, when oftentimes it isn't, and so you see Aaliyah struggling with that. But I think that's when you see some of the adults being like, well, listen, like, I'm sorry, but like, this is just what happens. This is what people do. You get to a point and that's it, because that is their experience with all of this. They've been here long enough. I think we find out, I think somewhere in issue 4, the end of this first arc, that the Outpost has been going on for like over 200 years now. Like they've been here for a long, long time, and all they've been doing, like their whole existence is simply to keep existing, like that's all they have is to keep existing. Everything you do is you're living simply to live. And I think there was a conversation in that first issue. I think Aaliyah and Stephen they're on the seesaw, and they're going back and forth, and I guess they're kind of talking about what they want to do, as they grow up here and things like that. And Stephen is very forceful about, I think he's kind of criticizing Aaliyah, because Aaliyah wants to join her parents on the Discovery team, which is the team that goes out there to try and learn and find new things about the planet and all that. And Stephen, on some level, is like, that's a waste of time. Like, what are we doing wasting resources trying to find and explore other things when we're struggling so hard simply to go by day. I think he ends that conversation that says, like, forget about thriving, we need to survive.
Yeah, and that's the constant tension for the series, and for humanity. There's always, that's a basic, like, conservative versus liberal approach. Conservative is, let's hunker down with what we have, make the most of it and enjoy life as much as possible. And the progressive or the liberal, and I'm speaking in terms of temperament, not in terms of political
ideology.
Is always pressing for what's better, what's out there. What could it be, rather than what is it?
Well, exactly. And as I read this conversation here, I thought of the I don't know if you watched the Battlestar Galactica reboot on Sci-Fi Channel.
I've not seen the original or the reboot.
The reboot's fantastic, but there's a line from Admiral Adama, the main head honcho, when he says, it's not enough just to live. You have to have something to live for. Yes. Right. And that is a common theme in this type of story, right? Where we're talking about I think the phrase they use, whether it's here or later on in the story, is the generational ship. Again, the last arc of humanity, or whatever we want to call it. Those types of stories of humanity's last hope, whether it's one ship or a fleet, however it is, we have left the place where humans are now to go somewhere else, another refuge. And it is that tension that you mentioned. It is what are we doing this for? Is it, all of humanity is on this ship, and our responsibility is to simply keep humanity going. Well, is that enough? What are you living for if all you're living for is to live? And that's what the Outpost is here. Every day is just about making it to the next day. And there is no room for really anything else. There's no room for discovery, for like
right.
even
and
like
I
amusement.
think to certain
you know?
people, that discovery is what makes life worth living. And when that is taken away by
Yes. What else do you
society,
have?
that
Yeah.
what else do you have? So
Yeah.
before we get too far off of the topic of suicide, not that we
Yeah.
want to spend the entire time here,
Sure.
I did pull this quote that I think is really powerful. It's a little long, but I'll read it. It's from David Foster Wallace. It's in the book Infinite Jest. And now, bearing in mind, this is a man who did end up years later taking his own life. So he understood the struggle. He says, the so-called psychotically depressed person who tries to kill herself doesn't do so out of, quote, hopelessness or any abstract conviction that life's assets and debts do not square. And surely not because death suddenly seems appealing. The person in whom its invisible agony reaches a certain and unendurable level will kill herself the same way a trapped person will eventually jump from the window of a burning high-rise. Make no mistake about the people who leap from burning windows. Their terror of falling from a great height is still just as great as it would be for you or me standing speculatively at the same window, just checking out the view, i.e. the fear of falling remains constant. The variable here is the other terror, the fire's flames. When the flames get close enough, falling to death becomes the slightly less terrible of the two terrors. It's not the desiring the fall, it's terror of the flames. And yet nobody down on the sidewalk looking up and yelling, "Don't, hang on," can understand the jump. Not really. You have to be personally trapped in the flames and felt them to really understand a terror way beyond that of falling. End quote.
When was Infinite Jest written?
I think 96, 95. I mean, it's like 3,000 pages.
Well,
it was probably written over from 1992 to 95.
Well, I guess my point is, though, as you were saying that, like, my thoughts went back to
9/11.
To 9/11, yeah.
Yeah.
And the idea of it's
definitely pre 9/11.
Yeah. There is the idea of taking control in that moment.
Yes. Right. Well, that it's like, I guess I would rather fall from this height and die instantly than burn alive.
Yeah. Well,
that's the choice. Yeah. And that's what he's saying, depression is. He's like, you can't see what the flames are on the other side that makes, like, they don't want to die, but dying is more appealing in that moment than what they have to endure. Which is the same as someone jumping from. It's a really powerful analogy.
I think when you take that mindset and you place it again in the setting here at Outpost Zero, which again, this highly contained, highly isolated, completely isolated colony here of everyone feels, or I guess the view is everyone has an obligation to everybody else, right? This only works if everybody does their job, and pulls in the same direction. And you see what the reaction is to Stephen's suicide. The magistrate, the shaming. Whoever was kind of speaking at the funeral talks about it's an epidemic of selfishness is spreading through our youth, which is, I think, that's both specific to this comment, to this story,
and ripped from our own headlines.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. The idea of, the idea that it is selfish to take your own life, to choose yourself over the work, because the work is society. And I in the wake of that, I like what they did with our 4 other kids, showing how
some of them toe the party line.
Well, different reactions, So you on one hand you have Mitchell, who lashes out with anger, like just seething rage, and yes, spitting the idea of it was selfish. He chose himself over the greater good and all that.
But some of that's also like masking. It's like, life here is hard enough. We're living the same hard life you were, and now you've made mine a little harder. Exactly. Now I have to deal with your death.
Exactly. That feeds in all that. So you see him lash out with rage. You see Sam, who was obviously already pretty isolated, he turns even further inward, which again, that is a relatable reaction to the death of a friend, especially at a young age. You have Liz, who almost seems to disassociate. Like, she's like, oh, I'm just going to focus on the good memories. Like, I remember who it was. I'm not going to think about anything bad.
Right. And then that's clearly a rote playbook. It's like, this is what we do when someone dies.
Yes.
Because it happens enough that we have to have, like, we can't go back into the whole pity process every single time. Otherwise, we'd be in constant despair. So here's how we've adjusted.
Yeah. And then you have Aaliyah who goes into detective mode. In her mind, it's like, well, I know Steven, he wouldn't have done this. There had to be a reason. So I need to figure out why. And she won't get closure until she figures out the answer. And so I think with these 4 kids here, you have 4 very relatable reactions to the death of a friend at that age. I personally myself, when 3 weeks after I graduated from high school, so at 18, one of my best friends was killed in a car accident. It wasn't a suicide, but still at a young age dealing with the loss of a friend like that. And so understanding what those emotions are, and I don't, not only understanding it for myself, but seeing it amongst my other friends as well, my group of friends, and seeing how these kids play out, and you see aspects of that. And I find that to be incredibly relatable, because at that age, like you don't have the facilities to really process that. And I think even for these kids here who have, again, probably grown up and seen death a lot more, and death in this way a lot more, you still struggle with it when it's your friend, when you don't have the answers, when you don't understand why, and all you're looking for is an explanation, which is the one thing you're never going to get. And so to see them react this way, and to see them depicted that way, and seeing all of them work through it, I think that's an important thing to show. And one thing I think that we talked about last week about how this book maybe has shifted its marketing idea now that it's fit and collected. I think this is the kind of thing.
I also think this book probably had an intrinsic marketing problem, because it's sci-fi but not really action-y. If you're pulling this monthly and it's like we're 4 issues in and it's still just people sitting around talking inside a bubble, I'm like, this is exactly what I signed up for. But I would imagine a lot of people see, like, these bright colors, and it's in space, and it's these teenagers, and there's a robot.
I think you're probably thinking it's a little harder sci-fi. Even though the setting is very hard sci-fi, but
even action-y. I mean, and I think that's another misunderstanding with comics as a medium. Like, people think that because it's a comic book, it has to be punchy and kicky and, capes and flying around.
Well, and hopefully we're past that now. Yeah.
I would think so, but, I never know. Like, just like any comic can be someone's first comic, I would like to assume that any episode of our podcast can be someone's first episode of our podcast. Sure. And if this truly is reaching a younger audience, then perhaps the podcast has hit a new audience. A younger audience that isn't as experienced in this. Certainly that was my impression of comics before I read them, was that, like, the words are kind of like in the way. It's all action-y stuff. And then, I started seeing Marvel movies, and my friends who were comic nerds on the ride home would be talking about all these intricate details from the plot in the comic. I'm like, how are these picture books conveying this? And it's just like, it was the most unabashed ignorance in the history of the world. So then when I finally held one, I was like, oh, this actually takes a little while to get through. Like, there's some meat on the bone here. Even in, like, old X-Men stories that my friend, had in our apartment, I was like, this is a lot more words than I expected.
Well, no, and I think that is a good point in terms of marketing, and so where I was getting at with that is the idea of I think when you read through, especially this first arc here, when you see what it's dealing with, and you see what those heavy themes are, and you think about, as a single issue and it came out in trade, this is at no point was it like specifically marketed towards a younger audience. It'd be an older audience, the kind of audience that would read some of the stuff that comes out of Skybound normally, comes out of Image, and you see how they might react and absorb the themes and the kind of the messaging, the representation that you see in this first arc. And then think about it if you handed this book to a 14-year-old kid. If you handed it to this book, if you handed that collected edition, that digest size
Right.
collected edition. You hand that to a kid who is of the same age of these characters. You think about the kind of influence that can have, seeing these kind of stories and the kinds of questions, I think the good kinds of questions, the kinds of ideas, the kinds of things that this book and this story can spark in their minds and their imaginations. And I think when I stop and look at it from that perspective, it's almost baffling to me that it wasn't marketed to a younger audience from the get-go. I think about how much more impact this can have, and this story. And I think you mentioned it last week that in the inside cover of the collected version, the digest collected version, it has like a trigger warning and
I was going to say, I'm wondering what the depth
prevention.
of our discussion, if we should be offering the same PSA, basically.
I mean, maybe so.
It says Outpost Zero includes content and discussion of and related to teen suicide. Reader discretion is advised. If you or someone you know has had suicidal thoughts or may need assistance, please call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline 1-800-273-TALK or call or text 988. And then you can go to sprc.org for Suicide Prevention Resource Center. So anyway,
I
think it's appropriate warning because it's bright and it's colorful, but it's actually pretty bleak.
Yeah, but I think there's a reason why that's in the full collected edition in that digest size, marketed to a younger audience.
Like you were saying, it might end up, at Barnes and Noble. If they pick this up and don't open it, they might not know it's a graphic novel, and they might just go straight to the teen section.
Yeah.
You look at look at that, and if I told you that's a book, where would you stick it? You'd say, well, that's, and for some reason, and I don't know why this is the case, publishers and authors, I guess, to some extent, assume that kids are not interested in reading about anyone that isn't their age. So if it's a book for 7-year-olds, the character will be 7. And if it's a book for 10-year-olds, the character will be 10. And if it's a book for 13-year-olds, they will make the characters 13. As an adult, you have the freedom to read any of those things. But for some reason, they're like, oh, kids wouldn't read, teenagers wouldn't read Outpost Zero if it was about adults. I'm like, why wouldn't they? I mean, they might. Give them a chance.
Yeah.
Well, and it's an extremely weird thing that we've all chosen to just go along with.
I seem to, what experience I've seen with this is you think that the kids like to read up. It's aspirational. Like if you're an 11-year-old kid.
I had so much pride about reading up.
Yeah. If you're an 11-year-old kid, you want to read stories about the stories that are popular are going to be probably stories that feature characters that are like 14 and 15 or whatever, right? Because that's aspirational in that way. But no, I think this book kind of pivoting in its marketing, I hope it finds a second life in that way, and because I do think these are important topics. Again, it's the way that science fiction in general deals with kind of modern day current topics, but I think very specifically this subgenre, again, we talked about this generational shift, this last arc of humanity's last hope kind of thing. I already mentioned Battlestar Galactica, which was a great source of metaphor and allegory for our world today, which has similar idea, similar gist of an idea that you can, because you're in this far off setting, this completely foreign setting, you can address these concerns, these ideas that exist in our modern day world, in our real world, but in I don't know if you call it a safe environment or a slightly askew way, or kind of a sideways view, but where it's not 1-to-1, but you can still make the connection. You can still see the parallels, So here we're talking about, again, we talk about suicide and or depression and mental health issues. We're talking about the I don't know, personal freedom versus kind of for the greater good, right. Your what do you owe to yourself and what do you owe to society, and how does that calculus change when your society is a few hundred people or maybe 1,000 people on this isolated planet that you're never leaving, you're stuck on. Everything you have, everything you are is going to be in this bubble. So what is what does it mean to do your work and live your life when you and everything else does is just here, and you can read that in this comic and see how that applies in our world now. And I think this fairly specific subgenre of story, which actually is pretty prevalent it's pretty plentiful, is well positioned, I think, to deliver that kind of message and allegory on our world.
Yeah. So I think we've gone tragically long now without addressing the people on the front cover of the book.
Yeah, maybe so.
There's not much to say about most of the characters yet in volume 1. Aaliyah is our main character.
Yeah.
I think we learn that she's an optimistic, hopeful character.
Yes.
And she's gritty, and she's willing to do risky or troublemaking things, but not because she's a troublemaker, but because of this great internal sense of justice and needing to know the truth.
Yeah.
Is that fair? She's not someone who gets her jollies from going in the restricted section or doing something like that.
Yeah.
I would almost liken her to almost like a Hermione Granger, where it's someone who's I'd really rather stay inside the lines, but I'm working on something more important here, so I am going to need to just go ahead and do what I need to do.
Well, yeah, and I think we see that in I think with a couple things. It starts off with her making the jump, because she says she's done the calculations, and there's a gravity thing there. So it's not, she's not doing it for, there's a thrill there, but there's also, it's not the thrill so much of the jump and the
testing
glide.
her work. It's I gotta know if I got the right answer.
Exactly. It's the thrill of discovery that I found something out here, and I did the math, I did the calculations, I learned something. And I think that comes from, again, her parents are part of the discovery team. And so their job is to go out and to look for stuff, to find stuff, to see what else is out there. And so she's grown up with that mindset of thinking about what's next, thinking about more than just how do we get to the next day, which is what most everyone else is focused on. But I do think what you talked about, this idea of her, she has a determination and a relentlessness. And I think that comes in, I think it's in issue 2, where we see that she's been assigned to the planning team, I think, and she's just bored to tears. And I think it's her mother sees that she sees that her attention is divided, that she's not focusing, and she recognizes that, okay, you've got something going on here, and until you deal with that, you're not going to be able to be a productive member of society, because you're not going to be able to do the things.
Gosh, what a refreshing line from a parent in one of these books.
Which is so great. It's so great that she recognizes that. But you see that she understands that, okay, we're going to need you at 100% focus. We need everyone, because we got because the storm has come, and we need it is all hands on deck here. But you're preoccupied with something. So until you get that out of your system, until you figure out what it is, go do that. And when you're done, you come back in and you're in 100%. And I do think, that's an incredibly rare mindset, specific for a pilot, for a parent to have, specifically to be that supportive, because oftentimes the parent's just like the wet blanket here, and especially in this community where it's so survival focused. And I think that's what sets Aaliyah's parents apart, what sets them apart. And I think what sets her apart is the character of, you see where she gets it,
Yeah, she comes by it honestly.
Yeah.
And, that's what makes them the discovery team. These aren't randomly assigned positions. These are based on temperament, which kind of leads us to Liz, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we still don't know what the singularity is in this volume. She every time she's on the page, she talks about my singularity is in 2 weeks.
It's coming up, which tells you it's a momentous thing. It's something important.
It's the life defining thing. It's not going to make any major decisions until this thing happens.
Yeah.
Obviously, and I think given their ages, given their society, this is clearly a coming of age story.
Yeah.
and clearly some rite of passage, some coming of age ritual. My first impression guess was that this is this is matriculating from the educational institution into the workforce, and you're being assigned your job. Just like is the critical point in the Divergent series or the Hunger Games series or whatever. It's like
exactly.
You turn to this age and you move from child to worker bee.
Yes. Yeah. You are now contributing to society in some way, whatever it is. And that's one of those things you as you mentioned, at no point does anyone stop and explain what the singularity is. And I like that because everyone there should know what that is,
Like, right. It's almost fourth wall breaking to turn around and say to us, like, here's what it is.
To be like, as a reminder, the singularity, like, well, no, every character there should know what that is. So I like in that way that it's not over-explained, that things aren't being held, your hand's not being held. And that I also like little things in terms of how the other ways of society works, and that they don't there's no breakdown of like, here's all the various vocations in this, and there's planning, you learn them organically as they come up. There's discovery team, there's the planning team, there's engineering, there's security services, fabricate, whatever it is, you learn them as they go. At no point does anyone stop and explain to any of the characters, here are all the facets of our world, because it wouldn't make any sense for them to do that. All of those kids would know what everything functions. So at no point would anyone need to explain all of these things. So that means us, the reader, we don't get that, but I don't think we need it. I think the way it's delivered to the reader, to the audience, is just, you learn it organically. You learn it when you learn it. Oh, there's another team here. Oh, this is what the fabrication team does. This is what the services team does. Things like that. You get that information as it becomes relevant to the story, and you're spared the big exposition download of like, here's the history of, here's all the vocations, here's what you're not over explaining things to the reader. And I appreciate that they didn't do that. I appreciate
and I dare say you could have found a clever way to do it. If they're walking through the school and you walk past the classroom with the little young kids and you just see one caption bubble from the teacher explaining to the kids,
I don't know.
Here's what the 14-year-olds are going through this year. There are ways to do it that aren't so like ham-handed, but the point of the story, when you start doing that, is like,
it becomes
the point of the story is to explain this world to you, rather than to move you forward in this that's potential murder mystery. The whole chapter 1 here is some Scooby Dooing.
And that's exactly what I was going to get at, is that what I like, the reason I don't think they did it is what you just mentioned, is that once you start explaining it in detail, your story becomes about the society and how it's built and how it functions. And this isn't,
and then you owe them that much information every
you have
time.
to keep explaining it.
Right.
Yes. And which is why I say I'm glad it isn't about that, because it's not that I don't care about that, but at this point I really don't care. Like, what are the teams? It's not important what the teams are and what they do. What's important is that they exist, and that at a certain point everyone gets selected and you get put into a vocation, and this is what you do now. You're a doctor now, this is what you do. You're an engineer, you figure something. What's important is that those paths exist, not so much what they are. And it's about knowing the base, like the base skeleton of the world, so that you can follow the story inside it. And it's not about the mechanics of the world, I guess, And I think, and that's what I appreciate about how that information is delivered. It's delivered in a way where you're not lost in the society, but you're not lost because you don't know what's going on, but you're not lost in the story because you're so focused on the behind the scenes mechanics.
Yes. And but there's not much else to say about it other than the best stories, in my opinion, do this same thing. Like, they do not over explain the world. They just say, follow the story.
Yes, follow the characters.
Don't stop and smell everything along the way. It's like taking a dog for a walk. and you have to stop and smell every tree and fire. It's like, oh my gosh, can we just get to where we're going?
Yeah.
And I think that's how a lot of bad sci-fi writers are. They want to over-explain. They want credit for all the stuff they came up with.
They want to show you how clever they are, because look at all the stuff I did world building wise. And if your story is just about that, then okay, great. That's probably not a story I'm personally going to care about. But yeah, it needs to be focus the characters, focus on the story, follow that. And then the other parts of the world that seem mysterious, like what's around that corner, how does this work? You'll learn that when you learn that. You'll learn it when it becomes important. That isn't what the thing is actually about. And I agree. That's what the best stories, whether it's, I think it's not specific to like sci-fi fantasy, but I think it's particularly important in sci-fi fantasy when you're dealing with a world that isn't our own, and you have rules that are set up in your story. The best stories are the ones that know it's not about that. That isn't what's important. You have to have good characters.
I mean, I even like
good story
when characters are tiptoeing around a rule of the world, and the reader just keeps thinking, "Why aren't they doing this obvious thing?" And then you find out 10 issues later, okay, that's why.
Yeah.
Like,
and they don't tell you that because all the characters know. The characters in the story know why they're doing it, but just because the reader does it doesn't mean they shouldn't do it. Yeah, it's
right. And I think a bad reader will think, "Oh, I think I found a plot hole or whatever." It's like,
yes,
no, like you're just being a bad reader. Like you're not
reading
the writing on the wall.
Yeah,
you have to have everything spelled out for you.
Yeah,
don't take that out on the author.
Yeah. But I mean, you can wait till the end of the story, see how it finishes. And then if you find plot holes, okay, congratulations. But yeah, in the middle of a story, thinking that you're cleverer than the people who created it is a losing cause. Yeah, because you don't know more about what's going on than they do. So,
yeah, although let me just go on a small sidebar here to say, most people don't understand what a plot hole is.
Yeah.
Like, basically, if a character comes to a fork in the road and there are two ways that they could choose to proceed and they choose one over the other, someone will think of what the other option was and say, "I found a plot hole." I'm like, well, no, that's not a failing of the mechanics of the world. That's just like,
that's the story.
That's the story. Like a character made a choice, and it's a choice you wouldn't have made.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make it a plot hole. So people just seem to be, for all the story we're consuming, people seem to be getting worse and worse at it. But I also think that just, no, I don't think it is fair. Like I said, I disagree with that.
No.
Because I think there are now more people.
It's a fair observation to make. I don't think the observations are fair. I think it's saying that we are getting
the
worse
impression
and worse
is that people are getting worse at it.
Yes, that's a fair assessment.
The problem is bad readers have
stories.
more microphones now.
Oh yeah.
Bad readers used to just be bad at reading and sit in their wrongness and be wrong. And now they have Twitter and Reddit and podcasts and things like that. Not us, obviously. Everything we say about stories is true.
Oh, we're never wrong. But,
flawless observations.
Yeah. But I think there is, because everything now is so overanalyzed and talked about and discussed everywhere. You just hear more of all arguments
for the hot take. Yeah, right. It's like, people can't just say, that was really good, I enjoyed that, and talk about what they enjoyed. Like, you've got to find a flaw with something, and that's what makes you an engaged reader. And I completely disagree. I think an engaged reader is saying, let's see what the author was doing here. Let's pick up the pieces. And then there's always that second treat of like, I don't even think the author intended this, but I really, really enjoyed X, Y, and Z.
Yeah. Or if it goes somewhere, where you wait and see to the end of the story, see how it goes, and then you can decide whether you liked it or not. Because I think the way I look at it is did where the story go make sense for what was set up? And I can judge that, yes or no. And then separate from that is, well, did I enjoy that or not?
Right.
And those things are independent. I can like how a story got to. That makes logical sense. I like what they did there. I didn't enjoy that as a story choice, though. But that doesn't. I can separate those things, and I think, I agree there. I think there is there's more of that going on now in terms of how we as a culture and society consume stories than I think there had been in the past. That maybe probably overall in the end is a negative, but I think there's a lot of good things that come out of it too. There are definitely positives of more people looking at stories more critically and analyzing them. I think you just got to take the good with the bad in that case.
Yeah. And yeah, I would rather have more voices participating, even if a lot of the voices annoy me.
Yeah.
Than have it be just like the few elites who are allowed to comment on things.
Yeah. You have to do more work to weed out the bad actors, but I think there is now more room for better and good voices. So yeah, I agree.
Okay, so we're halfway through the list of characters now. So we got Aaliyah, Liz, Stephen, who has committed suicide.
Yes.
Although I suspect we will learn more and more about Stephen as we go on. We have Mitchell, who will just knock out real quick because there's not a lot to say about him.
Yeah, Mitchell
He's
doesn't
kind
have
of
much
a loyal jock.
Yeah.
He seems nice enough, but dogmatically loyal to his friends, his family, and the colony. And is the one who, he's always threatening to beat up Sam to get information. And
they talk about another thing they mention here is that he's been training for the fights, and we don't know what that is.
Oh yeah,
we haven't seen that yet. I think you can hazard a guess and be pretty good about it that maybe their form of entertainment is some sort of boxing MMA kind of thing.
Like, how stupid can you be in a small colony? Clinging to survival to do some like contact sport of any kind.
Yeah, it's combat sport too. Yeah, like intentionally try to beat someone up. But no, so
they should have chess matches on Friday nights. That's what they should. And everyone should watch them.
Be a lot better than the fights there. But we see that he has that seems to be his path there. So yeah, he does come off as kind of the dumb jock there. And again, he reacts literally violently to Stephen's death, but then also like apologizes too. Like he understands that like he overstepped there, and that he has this this rageful side, which maybe feels it, explains why he's going into being a fighter here. Maybe he has some emotional control problems, but yeah, outside of that, we don't see much, other than he doesn't seem to like Sam. He doesn't trust Sam. Again, this goes into the mystery of what Aaliyah is looking into when it comes to Stephen is what, if any, was Sam's role in this? Because she gets a sense that he knows more than he is letting on. And she wants to go and investigate, and Mitchell just wants to go beat him up and gets the answers, and if he doesn't have answers, he just wants to beat him up anyway. That's just kind of Mitchell is the answers are like secondary. If we get them, great.
Right.
He just wants to punch somebody. And I think that's kind of who he is there. And
I think he's a hard one because I think he's slightly caricaturized so far.
Yes. Yeah.
And in broad strokes, if I can caricaturize even further, he's a stand-in for a type of person who probably isn't reading this book.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
And so I suspect, with it being a small cast ensemble, he's going to have more depth revealed as we go on. I think a smart reader would assume that he will either grow or that our understanding of him will grow.
Yes.
And probably both. But at this point, he's
not in the first arc
drawn football player. And the type of guy who probably doesn't read books.
Yeah, no, without question, he is not given much. And part of me I think you read that, at least I read that and think like this character is too much of a caricature. Like there has to be more. Like we have to get more. So I accept it now because he's way too one note, and he doesn't get enough page time to justify his reactions.
Who is our last character to talk about here, is also mysterious. We don't actually know that much about him. But we have almost the complete opposite impression. We're like, there's so much going on under the surface.
Yes. Yeah. Because we see him with Karen, his adoptive mother. We saw him in how he reacted to Stephen, even that first issue,
I'm trying to do the math on this. When did Karen become an adjective in society? I was like,
yeah.
was this an intentional naming, or was it just like we just need a generic white lady?
These
voice?
issues came out, they came out in 2018. I think issue 1 was July 2018. So July through October 2018. It was
slightly before I heard Karen being circulated to describe like any generic white woman.
It was probably in there. Well, I mean, although I don't know. I mean, they gave her the short haircut too. So I mean, like, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah,
there's a lot going on there. But
she can't speak to the manager. She is the manager. Let me just say the last thing that I'd like to observe. Well, I mean, not the last thing, but just one big observation. This looks like a colony from Earth sent out by me, because it's just, as far as I can tell, humans and cats.
Oh, yeah, that's the last thing. Yeah,
they don't have cattle. They don't have livestock. I don't think.
No, they have agriculture. There's farming, but they don't appear to
I'd
have.
be fine living in a vegetarian bubble on a nice planet surrounded by cats.
Yeah, there are a lot of cats.
Level.
A lot of cats. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, clearly they don't have like a spay neuter program on the colony. So I think what they've really built is a cat colony. Eventually the humans will be gone because the cats aren't offing themselves.
No. They are multiplying.
Prolific.
Yes. But yeah. So I mean,
So anyway, so Sam.
Yeah, but I think Sam. So as we see it towards the end of, or I guess not towards the end, at the end of issue 4, there's. Aaliyah finally gets kind of a breakthrough, and Sam reveals, because we had seen in the first issue that Sam was out in the airlock, and then Steven went and joined him, and then there was a lost in translation moment where we see something being said to each other, and then all of a sudden Steven's out of the airlock and he's in the frost and he's gone, and so here we get at the end of 4, we get what is said, and we see that Steven is going to Sam and says, "It's up to you to save them, Sam. You and Aaliyah, follow it down." And then follow it down, these whatever these ominous words are. That's what we're left with, and that's like the last words that Steven had to anybody before he stepped out into the frost. And so this now becomes the mission that you can assume going forward of Steven specifically saying that it's you and Aaliyah, Sam. It's the two of you guys. You guys have to go do this. And so, there, I think, launches what the next mystery is of the next arc, of what we're going to see of, again, these parallel tracks. Our kids are going to be doing this. They're going to be following whatever Steven was cryptically talking about. And on the outside, we see the various groups there trying to somehow melt the ice and break up the ice that's formed on their dome from the big storm that's hit. So it's how do we navigate these two different paths? The one of just sheer survival,
right?
Which is if we don't get the ice off of this, the dome collapses and we die. And this idea of discovery, of figuring out what this mystery is, follow it down, which Steven claims is about saving society. But when you leave a cryptic message, you don't know, but it is this idea of seeing what's next.
This is the one thing that okay, I'm here for it. And by the way, the back cover of the collected trade, Follow It Down.
Yes.
Are the big letters on the back.
And Follow It Down. That is the name of volume
the mantra, 2. Right. Yeah.
Well, it's the what they named volume 2 is called Follow It Down. So.
Right. But for the entire collected series, it's still like Follow It Down is the theme.
It is. That is.
I recently started watching The Good Place. Did you ever see that show?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the end of season 1, she has this brief window to write herself a message, and give it to the robot, and then she'll have it when her memory is reset. And she chooses to write "Find Chidi," and I'm like, why wouldn't you write "Not Good Place" and save yourself a lot of time instead of "Find Chidi," who's also having his memory wiped. It worked out serendipitously. And so I always think, whenever I'm always questioning what characters choose to write when they have these little messages, or not Penny's boat.
Yeah, I was thinking that. I was also thinking back to Paper Girls when they find KJ's feel like a stick.
I can't remember what was on it.
Yeah, it's basically like it's basically don't trust other Aaron or something like that. But of course, at that point, there are 2 other Aarons. There is
right.
the present Aaron and the teen clone from the future. So it's like, well, you're sending this back to the past, so there are multiple Aarons there. But again, it's the idea of, at least in time travel, of, well, I've already written this message, so I got to write the same one again. But I understand where you're going with the idea of when you only have a few moments to deliver the incredibly important information. Like, why are you choosing to be cryptic about it, right? Like, what does follow it down mean? That can mean a lot of things. Why not be a little more specific? Because it isn't like he was running out of time there. They're just standing in the airlock. And the next thing he's going to do is walk out of the airlock. So, like, why can't you take an extra 10 seconds and be a little more specific about what you're talking about?
Right.
Yeah.
Don't trust other Aaron, by the way. I just scrolled through and found.
Yeah.
And then I remembered, like, Paper Girls is built on stringing together things like that because is it Tiff who goes in at the end and places all the dreams in their heads? Yes. And they're all decrypting those clues the entire time.
Yes.
And, their moonwalk, all of the 80s references. Meaning, retrace your steps, go backwards. So anyway, all of the little time, like every time a character has to give a little clue, I'm always like, I guess in a pinch, people don't think of the perfect answer. And again, this is my, like, me, like, putting myself in that situation, saying, like, could I have come up with something better in a short amount of time?
Yeah, that's true.
I'm not calling this a plot hole, and I think a lot of people would. Like, no one would write that. It's like they might, and until we learn what follow it down means, we can't really judge whether those were good last words or not.
Yeah. No, I agree, but that isn't a plot hole, but that is definitely a well-worn story trope of the last words, the last message being cryptic, of the person delivering it having the best of intentions, of, like,
trying to help you, but giving you something,
but also
like a big tangled mess,
trusting that you're going to figure this out, when maybe they could have given you a little more information, maybe they couldn't have, I don't know, but they're giving you a slightly cryptic message, knowing that you're going to figure it out, maybe with the idea that the journey to figuring it out is as important as what the answer actually is.
I open at the close.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That all of Albus Dumbledore's entire will.
Yes. Everything about that.
Exclusively constructed.
Yeah.
Like,
to be a puzzle.
Down. Right.
To be a puzzle, to be figured out. When you also could have just been like, dude, here's what's up in this lane. I could just told you.
Yeah. And your one-on-one lessons for a year.
Exactly. Yeah.
Maddening stuff.
Yeah. But it does. It is a well-worn trope, because I think it is effective, because now you're left with, Aaliyah's been so focused on, what did he say to you? What were his last words? What did he say? You were there. If you tell me what this is the answer I need. This is the closure I need. And then Sam tells her, and it's like, oh no, that isn't closure at all. All that does is open up what the next mystery is. It's, and that's kind of what Sam's been dealing with, the idea of, there is this next thing I have to do, when Aaliyah's been so focused on, get me this answer. When I have this, I can move on. I can close the door and accept that Steven's gone, only to find out that his last words, the thing she's been looking for, is actually the thing that's going to propel her into another mystery, into another quest, another journey, which sets up for the next book again. So it's a trope because it works,
Right. Well, and some of that is just like, as an author, sometimes you just have to play the game. You just have to be like, this is how storytelling works. I love when someone gets transgressive and, violates those things. Mm-hmm. But if everyone did that, then there'd be nothing to push against, right?
Well, yeah, if everyone did that, then that becomes the norm. And then
you're rebellious to go back to the original thing. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, no, it's not a criticism of the story, because it's all about how well it's done. And I think here, I like its depiction. It isn't the best depiction, but I like it. The idea of, because it shines some light on why Sam has been so isolated here, because, like, the last thing his friend said to him was like, you got to save everybody. and then he leaves.
Right.
So like he's carrying that burden. So when you find out what exactly it is, what exactly was said to him, and you can look back and be like, oh, for the last couple of days, he's been dealing with this thing that like his friend, maybe at this point we see maybe Sam's only friend is basically telling him it is on you to save everybody. And then his friend just kind of pieces out. And so he's left with this idea of A, I got to save everybody, but also B, he was there. So he's probably carrying some guilt of like, could I have stopped him? You know, like what did I do there?
I mean, the other thing, I guess my last thought here is that now we've got this pairing of Aaliyah and Sam, both interested in the truth. Yeah. Aaliyah has been given free reign from her parents. In fact, encouraged to say, clearly you're not going to have your head on straight until you sort this out. Go sort this out. Sam presumably has the complete opposite orders.
Yes, because his mother is
in terror.
Yeah.
Because whatever's about to be exposed, his mother's at the top of it.
Yes.
And whether it's something that she's actively doing that he would be exposing, or something that is happening that she's permitting or aware of, or something that has happened on her watch, even if she's not aware of it, it's all bad, right? Yes. When you're in charge of it, like whenever something fishy is happening, it's all bad. Whatever, whether you were in on it and responsible, or whether you were asleep at the wheel and responsible in that way.
Yes.
It's all bad for her.
Yeah. Which what makes it such a great pairing, because there is that tension there of again, we have Aaliyah.
Same level of curiosity, totally different environments in terms of consequence.
Yeah, because again, Aaliyah is wired. We've seen she's literally all about discovery. The most important thing is just finding out what's there. Almost completely disregarding any consequences. In a way, she's a kid. She's young, a little naive there. But she has the mindset of the most important thing is just finding out what's there, and not really thinking about what potentially comes next. And I think you have Sam, who is probably going to be a little torn about that. Yeah, he wants the finances, wants to know, but there is a part of him that's like, we're supposed to save everybody, but like, what if this actually brings everybody down? Like, what if saving everyone means like destroying everything we have already? Is that worth it? And I think it comes from his perspective of, again, who is his mother, who his guardian is, the fact that Karen is the person in charge here. While Aaliyah's parents comes from, she's raised in a family of discoverers, of free thinkers, and so that pairing, I think, is there's a natural tension there that I think is interesting.
Yeah. Well, that's all I've got for volume 1. I mean, I absolutely adored these first 4 issues. I don't think they could have done anything more to hook me in. I was like, it was great characters. There were no unnecessary characters. There weren't extra people talking on panels and you're like, who is that? Do I need to remember who that is? Like, it helped me keep the level of focus that I like to have.
Sure.
I'm in a small community and I know everybody. And now we can move forward with the story, and we can introduce more people. But like so many books in the first issue will have, 20 different people talking, and you almost forget who your main character is. Whereas here we have this like laser focus on.
It's pretty streamlined. Yeah,
it's the smallest town in the universe.
Yes, it is. No, and I agree. I enjoy, and I think these types of stories, again, this subgenre of science fiction is one that I don't know necessarily drawn to, but I have consumed a lot of. I mentioned Battlestar Galactica, the reboot that Sci-Fi did. Sci-Fi Channel just did as we record this, they had recently wrapped up a new show called The Ark, which again is a very similar thing. The idea of Earth is dying, so we're sending out these various ships out in the world to places that we think are going to be habitable. A lot of comics deal with this kind of thing. And there are stories that I think I'm drawn to, I think because of the potential for allegory, the potential for showing ways to comment on society.
Any show that does those things and doesn't introduce allegory, now not like a flattened one-dimensional cheap propaganda thing, but like anyone who wastes and squanders that opportunity, that's to me is one of the greatest sins you can commit.
Oh no,
because sci-fi implies allegory.
Yes, and I think this specific type of this the Last Ark of Humanity or Isolated Colony of Humanity, Last Hope for that. That I think is really, really fertile ground and fertile ground for setup of story that I'm just attracted to. And yeah, I think these first 4 issues, this first volume of Outpost Zero, I think it really does that. It sets it up. And it's funny, until you mentioned it, it didn't even click to me, or I didn't bump on it. The fact that there really isn't any action. Like that didn't even, that's not even in my notes as an observation.
You and I are both fans of like expositional action.
Well, yeah,
like,
but
like
also
when I saw the movie, the Steve Jobs, I felt like I'd seen an action movie because it was the way it's cut and dialogue, right? The way it's cut, and it's 3 acts. It's like a 3-act play that is all people standing around talking.
Yeah.
But I was so riveted that I felt like, oh yeah, I'm all amped up the same way I was after I saw like Ford v Ferrari, and
sure.
it's a sickness.
I that's an interesting observation, because that is nowhere in my notes about. Well, nothing really happened. Like, but I wasn't even aware of it. I wasn't aware of it enough to notice that all the action was just people talking. Because for me, I was so engrossed. I'm so tied in with the characters, and I just like the situation that they're in. That struggle, that tension between surviving or thriving. You know, the thing that Steven says, the idea of, are you just living, or do you have something to live for? What are we doing besides just trying to make it to the next day? I'm so enraptured and engrossed with that I don't even notice that nothing, quote unquote, happens. You know,
right? Well, yeah, and I frankly
Yeah.
would have lost respect. I would have lost interest in it if there was like a pointless chase scene or something, just to depict action.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah,
because
the most action is the dodgeball scene.
It's like, right. Yeah.
The most
which
action,
is one page, and they're throwing a ball back and forth.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of lesser writers would not have resisted the urge, or studio or editor notes or whatever, to say like, why don't you throw like a car chase in here? Like, why don't somebody have something somebody else needs and they have to go through, and then you can like show us the whole area, and we can have some adrenaline.
I'm even thinking about it right now, how they could have done it in this specific thing. The storm hits, the cell hits, this big ice storm comes, like some critical system could have failed during that.
And you could have shown people frantically manually cranking things, and
except that doesn't happen.
Heading to the panels of this big wave coming in, but not seeing it means you have to imagine it. We still haven't seen what this pile of ice on top of their big dome looks like. I'm like, is this like a couple 100 feet of snow, or is this miles deep of snow? You just have no idea how grave the situation is, other than what they're saying about it.
Exactly. All you know is what, if they're taking it seriously and they're having the meetings about it, then, well, that should be all you need, right? Because as they mentioned, this has happened before. It happened before, and it didn't go so well. There were casualties. That's where Sam lost his parents, and so they understand the severity of the situation, and that's conveyed to us here. Just based on their reaction to it, and I think that's all you need to get into it. Because they don't need to force you into anything of, oh, the storm happens, and the life support system went out, the oxygen is going to go out, or something like that. We got to scramble and make it and figure out how to fix that, because that isn't actually what the story is about. It's not about surviving this specific ice storm, right? The story is about surviving in general, and the larger sense of, this has happened before, this ice storm, this kind of thing. This is a hazard when you're on an ice planet. So it's happened before, it's going to happen again. So how do we deal with this when it does happen? It's not specific to this one moment. Oh, this ice storm happened, and now the story is about how do we get everyone to survive because we lost some critical life support system. It's not about that. And so that action isn't important. It really is about the bureaucracy of the decision-making of, what plan of action do we have? Because that's what the story is about. It's about long-term survival, and how do we approach problems like this? Because this is going to happen again. We're going to solve this one now, but how do we solve the next one, and the next one, the next one? And that's
especially, if they like basically burn out their sky.
Yeah.
That's literally keep burning your furniture to stay warm for a night.
Yeah.
Which is one of the options they're talking about. So anyway, lots of great setup here. Just a little bit of payoff. Like she finally gets an answer out of Sam, which was the payoff we were looking for in volume 1.
Yep.
But like a good story, you get the answer that you wanted at the end of the first issue, but now you're at the end of 4 and you've got much bigger questions.
Yeah.
Like
why there's so many cats.
Great setup. I never question why there's so many cats. Yeah. Like I think if I could retire at Hemingway's house, I would.
Well, then also, the last shot there, I know you're focused on the cats there, but there's obviously this giant looming shadow as well.
I gotta be honest with you. I was focused on the cats. I did not see the giant looming shadow.
I was making a joke, dude, and you're like, nope.
No, that's just 100% genuine.
Yeah. So if you notice on the final panel of issue 4, when you see about 50 cats there, and there is a giant shadow. There's something looming over them, and that's how we end. That's how we end the first arc. So there are all these other questions here of why there's so many cats. What's this big shadow? We find out a little more about the one thing we didn't mention is that Sam is kind of obsessed over this hologram message from the GAP, the Genship Ancestry Project. So he only has a fragment of this message from this girl who, again, we presume is
being suppressed, right? Like they do not want the people in the colony to see stuff from society past or from the colony.
Exactly. Yeah. So we're trying to figure out, where do you find this? What is the Genship Ancestry Project? Why is this file corrupted? All this thing. And so that's kind of, you see, that's kind of Sam's driving force, the thing that we didn't talk about in terms of he is obsessed over this thing, over this message. What is she saying? Who is this girl? And is there's a Luke Skywalker aspect to it of like, what's the rest of this message? Like, I got to figure, I have this first part of it. I have to know what the rest of this is. And so I think for the reader here, we're left with the idea of, okay, what is the GAP? What is this Ancestry Project? Why is no one else? Why is Sam hiding this? Like if he has this thing, why is he hiding it? Why is it so important to him? And why can he not go to anyone else, any of the adults, and ask them about it? Because I think you're right. The idea is this has either been suppressed or it's been forgotten, or a combination of both. It was suppressed to the point that it has been forgotten. Because as we mentioned, we find out that they've been this colony has existed for over 200 years. So at some point, this was a thing that was part of their society and now isn't anymore, And Sam has come across it, and Sam is being driven by this. Yeah.
And by the way, the quote on the very first page of the comic is the one that we end chapter 1 with in large letters. I wish I could be there, wish I could see all the incredible alien things. Yeah. And so you realize that the Genship Project had Aaliyah's sense of optimism and discovery and hope that they're actively trying to extinguish inside the colony now 200 years later. It's piqued Sam's curiosity.
I think there's a question of are they actively trying to extinguish that, or had it already been actively extinguished and now it just is non-existent anymore?
Right? Yeah, people don't realize that it's been stamped out on purpose.
Exactly. They have no memory of what had come before. Like the institutional memory of that has now been forgotten, which may have been the point back initially. We're going to suppress this actively so it becomes forgotten. So generations go by. They don't even know, like they have no memory to forget because it doesn't even exist to them. They don't have to try to ignore something because it's completely out of sight, out of mind, because we're now so far removed from it. So I think, there isn't the open question of where did Sam get this? Why does he think it's so important? And how does it tie into what he's trying to do with Aaliyah now? Are these things together? Are they the same quest? Or are they different quests? And I think that's what we're going to explore going forward.
Yep. Until then, pick up Volume 2 or read Chapter 2 in the complete edition, or issues 5 through 9, I believe it is.
5 through 9, yep.
5 through 9. And we will see you here next Thursday to continue our discussion of Outpost Zero.
Peace.